Hey now, it's Dan Aberhart here, host of the Growing the Future podcast. We're back with Season 4, Episode 18. If you would like to get notified about when we have new episodes coming out, you can sign up for our newsletter at growingthefuturepodcast.ca, and you can find all of our past episodes there. Make sure to give us a follow on all the social media platforms out there, and you can catch the video of this conversation I'm about to have on our YouTube channel and all of our past episodes as well. You can also find the Aberhart family of companies online, starting with aberhartfarms.ca to learn more about our farming operation in Saskatchewan, suregrowth.ca to learn more about the precision agronomy consulting services that they offer there, convergencegrowth.com, where they accelerate solutions across food, health, and agriculture. And last but not least, aberhartegsolutions.ca, where we deliver one-of-a-kind fertility solutions of the future to your farm. My next guest is a highly respected pundit in the fertilizer markets. He's bringing his own unique point of view to the Twitter sphere and the internet and to the world. With a team behind him, they span all around the world connecting clients to the markets. He has 2 decades of experience in U.S. and international markets. He is the director of fertilizer for StoneX. He is an expert at educating the market on the future of fertilizers to offset price risk. You can also catch him this year, or next year, I guess, 2023, speaking at the Manitoba Ag Days. That's happening January 17th to 19th. So if you like the cut of his jib, you can learn more about the markets in a timely fashion there in person. Today, we're going to talk about how Josh got sucked back into agriculture after he left the farm and the service that he provides to producers. We're going to talk about how the fertilizer market works and what is affecting it right now. What does the outlook look like? What should a producer be doing right now? Given the fertilizer prices, which are extraordinary, besides gnashing their teeth and pulling their hair, the preacher man says it's the end of time. And the Mississippi River, she's a going dry. We're going to touch on that. So as Josh likes to say, sit down and grab a shot of whiskey for this, folks. You're going to need it.
Yep.
Welcome to the show, Josh Linville.
Yeah, I'm still working with Manitoba Ag Days to try and get them to provide every person in the audience a shot of whiskey.
I think it's fitting. You know, you're often the bearer of bad news, and I'm sure that you wish that you could parlay some really good information going forward here. But I think the positive thing is here that farmers have someone in their corner that can help them, get through what's happening in the markets right now. But before we get into that, what was your journey? How did you get inspired to become the fertilizer guru that you are today, Josh?
It's been a weird route. I grew up on a farm, Northwest Missouri, and we weren't big. I mean, we did, corn, beans, a little bit of wheat, a few head of cattle, raised tobacco. That's actually how I paid for most of my college, was tobacco fields. And honestly, I went to college. I did not have an ag degree. I went to business school, finance, banking, as well as real estate. And my whole idea was I'm going to do the Wall Street thing, investment banking, invest in real estate heavily, and just happened back upon a job that pulled me back in the agricultural sector. I started day one out of college in fertilizer, and I've never left. So the more I've learned about it, it's one of those things when we were younger, a group of friends and I that all worked together, fertilizer wasn't exactly the quote unquote sexy market it is right now. And in fact, it was one of those we used to sit there when it was slow and try and figure out how can we describe our job at a bar to the girls so that it doesn't include we work in fertilizer. It was like that. And all of a sudden now, I mean, it's popping up on news all over the place. It's a global phenomena. Everybody is aware of it. And it's kind of exciting. I mean, I look back and there's been some opportunities where I could have left the industry, but really glad I stuck around and actually really thrilled about the stuff we've been doing, trying to get a little more information out there. I mean, number one cost input per acre for a lot of farmers, you need to have more information on the market.
Now she thinks your fertilizer is sexy.
So that's right.
Just roll with it, tell the ladies.
Just like the tractor.
Well, that's a little bit of the question this year is what is sexier, like fertilizer or a tractor? Because you might have to choose. But I wanted to ask you, you've alluded to the farmer as a manufacturer, and I think that's helpful in the context of being less emotional when it comes down to the markets and making decisions where you got to pull the trigger on expensive inputs. So if the farmer is then a manufacturer of goods, then what is your role relative to that, Josh?
Yeah, and that's always something I always have to kind of like pre-start the conversation. Like, okay, number one, give me a second to get through this before you start throwing things at me, because you're going to want to throw things at me.
Right.
Most people usually do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when I look at it, I look at a farmer as exactly that, as a manufacturer. You're nothing more than that. And the reason I say that is that you are looking at your inputs and your outputs. You are looking at your fertilizer in and your grain out, your chemical in and your grain out, your diesel fuel in, your seed cost in, everything in and your grain out. That's all it is. And a lot of the manufacturing operations out there, at the base of it, they truly don't care. They don't care if their input is $200 or $800. They don't care if their output is 200 or 800. What they want is for their input to be as small as possible and their output to be as big as possible. And as you know, from a farming perspective, listen, I grew up around it all my life. If I were to go to any of my friends that farm and say, would you rather have, would you like to sell your corn at $6.50? Well, it should be $7. Okay, what if I can get you $7? It ought to be $8. If I go to them and say, I can get you your urea, it's $800 now, I can get it for $400. Well, it should be a little bit less than that. Okay, I'll give it to you for free. That's great, but who's going to pay to truck it here? That's an emotional response. And we don't truly know if a high price, low price is good or bad. It's not until we look at that input output side of it, that ratio, to figure out, is it a good ratio or a bad ratio? And that's what we're trying to look at it from that perspective. It's a different point of view.
So how does your business help these folks as manufacturers?
So we're trying to, number one, trying to give information, because as again, a lot of the information in the fertilizer sector is controlled from the top down. And it is very dependent on if that person passing along the information is long or short. And I don't make that statement saying that anybody in the value chain is doing it purposely. But a big reason why I always start my presentations with showing I am zero long or short physical, I am zero long or short paper positions, I am zero long or short fertilizer stocks. That is an on-purpose thing. And I've left a lot of money on the table not investing in fertilizer stocks, 2 years ago when we saw this starting. But it's important for me to be able to give this information without a subconscious point of view, because if I'm long every single fertilizer stock out there, you and I are talking, I'm sitting there telling you why I'm bulled up on every single thing, consciously or subconsciously. In the fertilizer marks works that way. All the information that rolls down has to go through long positions, short positions, their bias in the marketplace. So try to get that information further down without putting our own personal bias on it. It's not perfect. I get married to my own points of view on storylines and things like that, and I've got to break myself out of it, but doing the best that we can, but also point out opportunities, not only on the spot markets, but in the futures with the paper markets. Sometimes maybe buying phosphate today and selling December 23 grain is not the best option. Maybe buying Jan, Feb, March fertilizer paper and selling that grain, that's the better opportunity.
Well, who's your customer then? Is it the producer or speculators or combination?
A combination. I would say anywhere from we have farmers obviously putting out the monthly newsletter. Some are starting to talk about, hey, how can I start using the fertilizer futures paper to help my operation? All the way up to some of the bigger manufacturers in the world and everything in between.
Nice. So why has this conversation about fertilizer become so critical in the last couple of years, and what's changed with volatility versus what we've seen in the past historically?
It has become insanely volatile because so many things in the last 2 years have happened that if I were to come on your show 2 years ago, let's say I take a time machine back and you're like, yeah, let's have you on. What do you think is going to happen? And I go through even half of the events that have occurred, you would stop recording and say, hey, thanks a lot for the time. I don't think this is going to work out. And we'd be done. I mean, because you would think I had lost my freaking mind. Yeah. But that's what's happened. It's been a tremendous amount of world events, and those events are going to continue to happen for the next couple of years based on what we're seeing. And you're also seeing fertilizer become more of a commodity. Before, it was more of a produced and then sold. Now, all of a sudden, it's following market patterns. The manufacturers of fertilizer are losing their grip, and all of a sudden, it's more of a market-determined price rather than their determined price. So it's gone through a shift. It's you couple that along with all these world events that have happened, all of a sudden put uncertainty in the world markets. Now everybody's like, why are we seeing these massive price swings up and down and everywhere? Because these world events are massive.
Yeah. How do you define a black swan event? I know that you talk about that a lot in your verbiage.
Yeah.
And why does it feel like we're seeing it so frequently now?
Let's take this current one right now, European natural gas. To a certain extent, we knew that Russia And when I say Russia, I don't mean the Russian people. Vladimir Putin was threatening to invade Ukraine. I look at that as a black swan event because nobody truly ever imagined that a country like Russia would just go after another country that did nothing to them. It was just like one day he woke up and decided, you know what sounds great? Ukraine. I'm going to go take them. And how do you work on something like that? How, again, if I were to go before and sit there and say, okay, well, I think Russia is now going to take all of Europe over to Germany. Everybody would say you're full of crap, Josh. It's those type of events that there's very, very little chance of it happening, but it's groundbreaking.
Yeah, it's incredible what's happened, eh? And it seems like there's more and more happening on the world stage. So, how is food production correlated to fertilizer? How do you track that?
Well, obviously, I mean, it goes into all the grains, right? If if the cost to raise the grains and everything go up too substantially, the farmers are going to look at other options. They're going to look at planting other things. They're going to look at CRP ground. They're going to take it out of production, whatever it might be. So as the fertilizer costs go up and the other inputs costs go up, and that's the thing. It's not just fertilizer, right? Diesel fuel, seed cost, land cost, everything has gone up. It costs more to produce that. Well, you're not going to keep your food costs where it is because farmers are not going to farm for a loss. They can't do it. So that food cost has to go up. And plus, we're seeing situations where our stocks to use are getting very, very narrow. I track a lot of corn. Decades ago, our stocks to use was incredibly high. If we had a hiccup in production, that was okay because we had that stuff sitting back. We had a little bit of an insurance plan. If you were to take a corn trader from 20 years ago and stick him in the market today, he would lose his mind. He'd say, holy crap, how are we operating with so little in reserve? And that's the thing. We've done this across all the products. We've done that with fertilizer, with grains. We are dealing with very few stockpiles in case of a hiccup. So when there is a hiccup, it's a very immediate reaction. It's a very violent reaction.
Who's profiting off this volatility, if I may?
Obviously, the fertilizer manufacturers are doing quite well. There's some big bonus checks that are going out there right time.
True. Yeah.
Let's take nitrogen, for example. If you are a nitrogen producer in the world outside of Europe, you are loving your life right now. 2 years ago, they could not have dreamed that they would be making the kind of money they're making today. Phosphate potash suppliers, producers, same thing. They're making a tremendous amount of margin. Maybe not quite as much on the phosphate side, given where the input costs are, but still making pretty good margin. Every fertilizer manufacturer is doing quite well outside of those in Europe who had to shut their plants down due to the high cost of natural gas.
What is happening over there? I mean, pipelines being blown up. People are at war. You can't get ships out. You have to choose between making fertilizer and feeding your people or heating the homes. What's going on?
Yeah, I've got some people sit there and say, well, why can't you tell me what's going to happen with urea price? And I was like, okay, tell me how the Russia-Ukraine conflict is going to resolve itself or not resolve itself. Well, what do you mean? Tell me what's going to happen there and I'll give you a lot better point of view on it. Well, I can't tell you that. Well, then neither can I. Russia, like I said, Putin came out of COVID and decided, I want Ukraine and went after it. A lot of the free world stepped up and said, that's fine. No, you're not. We're going to, stop doing work with you. Russia is a huge supplier of natural gas to Europe, the number one supplier through the Nord Stream pipelines. You've probably heard that in the news. Well, Putin decided we're going to shut that off. And it came up with every excuse under the sun for why the flow stopped, but everybody knew why. Now, there was a certain part that we're starting to think, Putin might be removed from power or anything like that. I think Putin saw that a little bit and decided, you know what? I'm going to make for sure that I'm going to put the hurt on Europe regardless of what happens to me. There was sabotage on the pipeline, big explosive, multiple points, very, very far distances apart from each other on the pipeline. It was not a natural disaster. Now that we're seeing the robotic pictures down there, they are saying there is no doubt in their minds it was an explosion. That's his way of saying, okay, you want to support Ukraine? You want to massacre my people and make me look dumb? I will make sure our supplies do not come back. I will make sure there's not an avenue for Russian natural gas to come back until they can fix the pipeline. And that will not be till next spring.
He's not that subtle, is he?
No. I don't know what he did during COVID, but he was not a happy guy when he came out.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, he's 40 feet away from everybody at those big oak tables. And it's crazy what's happening. So riddle me this then. If we can get nitrogen essentially out of the air and America is like perfectly capable with all the technology and natural resources, essentially as an island unto itself. With being able to, you guys are a net energy exporter now, right? Since the advent of shale technology, why in the hell can't you make? We're seeing deglobalization. Why do we got to depend on anybody else for this? Why can't we make our own?
We did there for a while. I don't. If anybody can get a hold of the Biden administration and ask them the same question, I'd love to hear what the answer is. But obviously, we've actually seen North America as a whole move more towards this green energy thing. And I'm saying this. I'm not going to badmouth the green energy. I think there are things we need to look at. I'm all about leaving the world in a cleaner place than when we got it. And not like it was in bad shape to start with. But it's unproven technology from my point of view. So the idea that we need to shut down proven energy supplies in the face of bringing on green energy that may or may not work is a very dangerous game, and especially with the world politics that are going on. I'm all for it. You look at technology that came out of the NASA programs. A lot of that was kind of new and scary, and it'll never work, and it did. But the problem is you've got to make sure you still got the old stuff until you can make that transition. And that's a very unfortunate part. Is our administrations are both going towards green energy. They don't want to do the old style. We could very much we could build new nitrogen production. Canada has supple amounts of natural gas up there. If we were to go back to what we were, we would have plenty. We would not need the rest of the world. We could be a net exporter of fertilizers and nitrogens, but you've got to have the administration's backing on it. And that's something we don't have today.
Did we miss the mark with regulation that was intended for one thing, but the outcome will be much different? People in Germany might be burning wood to stay warm.
Yeah.
We can't feed the world without fertilizer. Are we going in the wrong direction?
I'm afraid we are. Some of the things that we've seen pushed by some of these governments, some governments around the world came down and said, you have to reduce your fertilizer applications by 30%. That is a government verdict from people that have no idea how it actually works. A great example of that is the U.S. Secretary of Ag came out at the Commodity Classic back in March and said, "Oh, we're going to help out. We're going to help, build new production, new producers, new competition. We're going to give a $250 million US dollars." I appreciate the sentiment, but that shows you how disconnected they are. 250 million, trust me, I wouldn't be working right now if I had $250 million. But a new world scale nitrogen facility will cost between 4 and 6 billion US dollars. 250 isn't even a 10% down payment.
Do we see any wherewithal at home here to ensure food security in the context of this conversation?
I would hope that one day they'd open up their eyes and say, "Hey, we need to actually help out. We need to get some more production coming." Like I said, the avenues are there. We've got the natural gas inputs in order to do this. I know there's a lot of looking at the green technology like green ammonia, blue ammonia, but I think to a certain extent we need to start ramping up some of the older technology. We can put scrubbers on it. We can meet the environmental standards that they put forth, but we need to be producing more. I mean, the globe, we know for the most part new production coming online between now and 2025. We also know what demand is going to do, what it's going to grow between now and 2025. World capacity does not grow fast enough to keep up with world demand. By the time we hit 2025, those two numbers are very close together, which means that if there's further hiccups on production, the market's going to move very quickly, very hard.
So for the listener who's on their third whiskey, it's not getting any better as it stands.
No, unfortunately, I hope this is one of those things that you'll have me on again in a year. And you can go back and say, let's go through all the reasons you were wrong. Urea is a fraction of the price. UAN is dirt cheap. I would love to be able to have those conversations. I will eat crow till I am fat and out the door. But unfortunately, when we look at the S&D numbers today, that's not the case.
How much of your job does depend on being right when you're giving advice?
It's honestly, it's surprising. I'm always very scared of putting out a lot of opinion pieces and saying I'm bullish, I'm bearish, I'm this, I'm that, because I'm like, that's not my job. And I've had a lot of people say, I don't care. The fact that I can have somebody sit there and at least give me a point of view on it, you're not going to be right 100% of the time. Because if you were, you're not talking to me. It doesn't happen. So I'm trying to get across from that. I'm not right all the time. There's a lot of stuff I miss, but we do the best we can.
One of the things I think you've done very well on Twitter, and you've become a lot more popular recently, is not only because this has become endlessly fascinating and there's lots to report on, but you do have an opinion and you are willing to share that. So if a farmer's sitting there this fall and they're looking at next year's crop, it's got to be the most expensive proposition on planet Earth. Not even getting into interest rates and inflation and equipment costs and what a new truck, everything under the sun.
Right.
Where is farmers' sentiments at, and what are you telling them in the big picture?
Number one, the first thing you need to do is you need to start looking forward, and that includes conversations with your retailer. And I know a lot of people are going to kind of shudder at that idea because the farmers don't like giving that information. They're afraid it's going to be used against them. They've had that happen before. Again, I get it. I come from a family that very much want to keep our information to ourselves. The less you tell people, the better off you are from a negotiation standpoint. But you've got to consider you're seeing all this price volatility, and you're probably not even seeing all of it. Imagine your retailer who's sitting there saying, I've got to go buy thousands, tens of thousands of tons worth of position for a farmer who may or may not buy in a price that could literally move hundreds of dollars per ton up or down. This is not the fertilizer market from 15, 20 years ago where you just buy, you sit on it, prices move 5, 10 bucks a ton. These are job killers. These are company killers. Positions that used to just sit there and wait for you to show up aren't the case anymore. There's too much risk with it. So one of the big things is have more conversation. I'm not saying you lock it in, don't lock it in, but have the conversation of what you need. So your supplier can make better plans so that it's actually sitting there when you need it. And the other side of it is hedge. And I don't mean by fertilizer paper. I mean, when I grew up, I never understood why my dad didn't sell more forward grains. And what I finally understood when I took this role is because if he sells his corn for December 23 right now, 6.15, 6.30, and the price of his fertilizer triples in price, he has just lost. If he buys his fertilizer and the price of corn drops to $4, for example, he's lost. Doing nothing is a better position than doing one side or the other and leaving it to risk. Just buying the fertilizer, selling the grain is speculation. And that's where we come into the whole manufacturing or the input output side of it.
How do your farm, like what percentage of farmers are acting on that? No, that seems like if you could hedge one thing against the other in the future and you're ostensibly still getting a profit, what's wrong with that? But how many producers have the knowledge to do that and are doing that today, Josh?
I hope that it's growing by the day. Obviously, there's no way to put a number on that. I think a lot of people, when I get done with the presentation, it's funny because every single person that has me come speak, they're like, oh, there's going to be a ton of questions. The guys are asking questions. And, that's why I always sit there and say, give them a shot of whiskey because at the end of the day, they are going to be so shell-shocked that they're going to be like, holy crap, I don't even know what to ask anymore. I don't know how many are buying the fertilizer and then selling the grain. I hope that with the way things are today, I hope more are taking that approach because my big deal is, let's say you buy your fertilizer, sell your grain. You're doing that because you think that's a profit. And your S&D, your balance sheet and all that, and that's a profit. And your worst decision is that you could have made more on that relationship. That is a good year. That means your worst decision was a profitable decision.
Well, and that's hopeful. I think a lot of producers feel like they're getting taken. And I think a lot of that vitriol is directed towards the retailer and then, of course, everybody up the food chain. But the retailer is the person that's present, that's presenting you the current situation that you have to deal with. Is that holding farmers back from pulling the trigger at a time when, hey, $1,000 nitrogen might be a good deal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. In this case, the crap rolls uphill. I know back when I first started in the industry, I did a lot of anhydrous truck around the country. And trucks don't always show up when they say they're going to show up, right? I mean, if you've dealt with any truckers, the guidelines and the timelines they give you are not always 100% correct. And I used to always be confused on like, why in the world this truck only showed up a day later? Why is this guy so mad? Well, what I didn't understand is I've got one contact at one retailer yelling at me. That retailer has a dozen farmers chewing on him, and not just at his office, at his home, when he's field checking, at the church, at the grocery store. I mean, and everything rolls up that hill at that point. But unfortunately, with the markets the way that they are, it's just these situations continue to pop up, delays on shipments and everything else.
How are you coaching retailers then to approach fertilizer markets and their function to help farmers get that product on their field?
Try to point out the opportunities. Again, look at more of the ratio perspective. Look at the grain and the fertilizer price, and sit there and show that, okay, yeah, maybe the price is a little bit higher than what we expected it to, but when you look at what the ratio is today, it's a better opportunity. And for a lot of the guys, when you sit down, you talk with them, you start looking at it through that way. But the progressive guys will look at it and say, you know what? Actually, that makes a little bit of sense. Let's try that. And they do it the first year and they figure out that work. Let's do a little more of this next year. And it grows on itself. It's a slow process. Trust me, again, farming is not something where we change really, really quickly, but it's something after a few years, it's like, yep, that was the opportunity. We should have done this, should have done that. It starts to grow. And listen, these markets are sitting there begging for us to change practices, more variable rate, more GPS, more everything. The high price of fertilizer is going to make us change practices. And hopefully this is one of those avenues.
Is this whole movement towards regenerative ag, which depends to a much less degree on synthetic fertility, going to move the needle in global supplies anytime soon?
Do you mean kind of like the bios and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's products, but there's also practices that are saying, hey, we can grow a lot more or the same with less synthetic fertilizers or maybe
Yeah,
none at all. Is that even starting to make a dent?
it is. Look at phosphate and potash. We were almost record highs back in late March, April. And then the demand wasn't there. We had a lot of conversations in the winter time saying, listen, if demand is off, this is going to take this thing down. A lot of people, oh, the demand isn't off. They always put it on. Don't worry about it. It wasn't there. Demand was down. I'd say probably 30-35% on both of those two products. Some of it, farmers understand that they can mine the soil for a season or two. They've got adequate supplies. They can grow the crop without having to add new stuff on, and they'll just take what's in the soil. Others, they may have, 5 years ago, they may have looked at things like variable rate technology and said that's too expensive. And with the price being as low as it is, it doesn't make sense. The cost is greater than the return. Well, that makes sense when urea is 175 and phosphate is 250. When urea is 900 and phosphate's $1,200, all of a sudden those numbers look a little bit differently. So yeah, these higher prices continue to solve high prices because you start cutting the demand and things like that. And yeah, I think these are all technologies that are here, and after we adopt them, I don't think they go away.
When you're looking at supply, that's one side of the equation, but then moving it around is another. What sort of black swans have you been seeing on the logistical side too?
Yeah, number one has to be the Mississippi River. Lower Mississippi is dealing with record low water flows. And I'm not sure how much the audience is aware of this, but I mean, for North America, the river systems are our artery system. It is the most efficient and most cost effective way to move product from point A to point B. And this week we've seen 2 or 3 points that had to shut down again. Memphis, Vicksburg, I think Mississippi was one of them. These barges are having to load lighter, which means each single barge that moves upriver has less tons on it. The barges are taking, or the tows are taking less barges per trip, which means each round trip has that much less product on it. You're having delays. We are losing our river system. Now, we've got good chances of rain Monday, Tuesday, another chance of rain next Friday. If we can have these be widespread and big events, they can refill the system very quickly. But as long as the river system is down, what that means for the end user is that NOLA price, New Orleans, Louisiana, which is what we track most often, it's the most liquid market out there. That's our kind of like Chicago corn, if you will. That's what we track. That difference between there and all of the inland points throughout North America are going to get much, much wider because you can't use that. That's been one of the big logistical black swan events. Number two, possible rail strike. U.S. railroads are talking about going on strike again here in November if they can't come to terms. Now, I think it's an extremely low probability that they go on strike. I think that each side is just negotiating as hard as they possibly can. But because the chances are not zero that they go on strike and the ramifications of a strike are enormous, we've got to watch that one as well. If we lose the river and the rail, I don't even want to think through that scenario.
Why can't we just truck it, Josh?
Not enough trucks. Truckers have always been hard to find. And all of a sudden, the world is starting to figure out how darn important they are. We've lost a lot of bulk over-the-road truckers to things like FedEx and Amazon. They hook onto these trailers. They make more money per mile, more money per day, and they get to be home every night with their family, or every weekend with their family, versus fertilizer loads and grain loads that might take them halfway around the country, and they're gone for weeks on end.
At what point, though, will people stop ordering stuff on Amazon if food goes through the roof because we can't get any fertilizer? Like it's all connected, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a long-term situation, but unfortunately, that doesn't look like it's a short-term. It looks like we've got some pain at the pump here for a bit.
No doubt. No doubt. So let's talk specifically as though you're at a farmer's kitchen table. Say you're talking to my brother who's looking at inputs for a 17,000 acre broadacre farm in Saskatchewan. What would you say right now about buying his nitrogen for next year?
I would say if it is something where you can lock in that nitrogen and the values for your grain next year look solid and you can lock in that ratio, we need to be doing it. I think at this point, not possession's 9/10 of the law. Having that locked up and in place and ready to go, there's a lot to be said for it. Um, yeah, I'm one. The quicker we can step into this thing, the better off we are. When I look at the European situation, and again, I think there is a chance production in Europe turns back on, either by the natural gas prices continuing to dwindle lower, or because governments step in and say, we really need this fertilizer, I'll subsidize your costs, and all that turns back on. That is my major bear event, but that's a very small probability bear event. A lot more of the avenues going forward does not include European production, and that's all supportive of nitrogen going forward.
There's a bit of a dip up here in the summer. I think a lot of people moved then, but for anybody who didn't do anything, you're saying now is the time. If you can lock it in, don't wait. You're not anticipating any further deals as such, or being patient and waiting at all.
Not especially right now. We're doing a little bit of a dip, but it's also, if I talk about NOLA, I'm talking about New Orleans, Louisiana. We are seeing barge prices drop, but that's because they can't move those barges north. It's one of those things where it's the market isn't doing what it normally should. So NOLA dropping $10 a US dollar does not mean the inland numbers are going to drop. In fact, they could go higher as the river continues to struggle. I Again, my biggest bear point right now is Europe turning back on. I think it's a very low probability. I don't see it happening. If I've got to take these odds to Vegas, I'm betting on prices going up going forward.
Well, aren't you in Vegas perpetually if you're farming?
Well, I was going to say, at this point, we've made a lot of jokes over the last several months where it's like, we might as well just take all of our money and go to Vegas.
Yeah.
You know what? You get better table odds and they'll bring you a free drink and maybe you get a free buffet ticket or something.
Most farmers I know, they don't gamble when they go there because they've done the gambling the rest of the year. That's a lot of speculation.
Vegas is boring compared to everyday life.
That's right. That's right. Are you watching any of these new technologies where, say, they have more efficient catalysts in the Haber-Bosch process, or green ammonia, or is anything like that going to move the needle?
I am. A lot of those things are being talked about. The problem I've seen is the projects I have gotten to look at really in depth, they don't make sense without the massive government subsidies. And that's why you stick the green, the blue, and all this stuff. It triggers a government payout, tax incentives, loan, free interest loans, things like that. So it's not something where it's just like, if we just build this facility, it doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind. And ultimately, I think a lot of the investment firms are sitting there saying, oh, farmers will eat this up because, it comes from a green energy process. And I'm like, maybe they feel good about it. Maybe if we ever get into a carbon credit type situation, it'll make a difference. But I can tell you today, the average North American farmer does not care if their urea is produced by a green plant, a blue plant, a purple plant, a typical plant, a yellow plant. They don't care. They care that the analysis is right and the quality is good.
Is there any chance that if you dilly-dally, you might not get any? I mean, every year there's threats of that. Oh, you're not going to get it. Is that for real now?
Yes. Plainly put, yes. If the river system does not heal itself, if it does not get back to normal, we will have the ability to get enough imports into North America to cover demand for spring. But without, say, the river system, we're not going to be able to move it. I truly believe, I don't have the numbers to show. I can't back it with, using spreadsheets or anything like that. This is a gut call. But if we lose the river system, I don't think there's enough rail added capacity that can make up the difference. I don't think there's enough truck capacity to make the difference.
And historically, that Mississippi, I mean, how much of an anomaly is this, Josh?
These are record low levels. I mean, we are setting record lows. The only thing keeping these river systems functional to the point that they are dredging operations and the barge owners doing whatever they possibly can to lighten the load to get through these choke points.
How the hell did Waylon Jennings know, or what? Who sang that?
Yeah,
I think a couple of old country artists there. That was very similar. But the 8 tracks in the 4020.
I was going to say, when we first started talking about this, I had a lot of people sending me that a link to that song.
Oh shit! Country Boy Can't Survive.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's nitrogen. Now phosphorus. My brother I asked my brother, what would you most want to know from Josh, and he said, is my phos going to be double in 10 years? Should I actually be considering a building program at these prices and levels now?
I would probably say no.
Yeah.
Um, I understand where he's coming from. So today's world, and again, we've got to zoom out. We got to look at the world market. The world has lost one of its biggest providers of phosphate, China. China is the single biggest producer of phosphate in the world, the number one or number two as far as DAP map exports. Very major deal. And the Chinese government last fall came out and said world supplies are too tight, world prices are too tight or too high. We are shutting down exports. Chinese product will stay in China for Chinese farmers that make sure we have enough supply for our people, that make sure prices are down. We've lost them. We expect a similar announcement to be made as we get closer to the new year. We think they're going to do the exact same thing. That continues to lead us towards, well, okay, we lose that one. Maybe that's a long-term situation. North American production, a lot of it's based in Florida. There's only a finite amount of phosphate rock left down there. And if you've been to Florida, when I lived down there, I never paid sales tax. The entire Florida economy runs on tourism dollars. People going to the beach, people going to NASA, people going to see Mickey Mouse. It's tourism driven. Phosphate production doesn't exactly get everybody all hot and bothered from a Florida income perspective. So chances are they're not going to expand those mines. Now, the thing that we're fairly excited about going forward is there's starting to be a lot of research found that in like Africa, there are more spots that have phosphate reserves, very good phosphate reserves. Morocco, over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, have quickly become one of the leading producers and exporters of world phosphates. If we can start to see more investments, more ground, more phosphate rock found there, which I believe is there, and they start producing there, that could all of a sudden offset China, and then some. We have more supply than we know what to do with.
Hmm. What do you think about these phosphorus sources that are being built and sold as highly available? Maybe they've got a kind of some sort of pseudoscientific snake oil, if you will, angle to them, and they're higher price premium, but you're putting them in the right place. Is that replacing MAP or DAP as a commodity? And if so, if producers are using less amounts of that but still have that feel good, like, oh, I'm doing good, are we mining our soils and it's going to create a problem in 10 years?
Yeah, and the new technologies, I'm never going to be one that sits there and says, nope, it won't work, because I've not done the research on it. And I'm not going to sit here and be a naysayer for something I haven't done the legwork on. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, but to your point, there's been a lot of snake oil that's been sold over the generations. And I'm very much a show me it works. If you can show me it works and you can prove it works and you can start to get wide spread adoption of it and have it at a price that isn't obscenely high, okay, I'll start to have that conversation. I'll start to include that in our demand models. But I need to see it first. A lot of this bio stuff, I think it's fascinating. I love the idea of it. But some of the questions I always ask, they struggle to answer in a way that makes me comfortable. So it's one of those where I put it on this is a possibility, but I can't add it yet until I actually see it in practice.
Would you recommend buying your phosphorus right now?
No.
Really?
Right now, the forward futures markets for phosphate and NOLA, again, where everything is based, is showing the price going lower into the winter months. Now, that may not make a difference if we can't get the river systems running, if we can't get the logistics working, if all of a sudden there's a demand spike unforeseen. There are things that obviously make it, we don't look at the forward grain market and say, oh, okay, the price is $7 for March. It's going to be $7 by the time we get to March. Markets change all the time. But as of right now, there's a lot of things pointing to lower demand. Inventories carried over from last spring into the summertime. Forward markets are showing lower prices. I'm a little bit of drag our feet with a catalyst. With one thing I would say, if you drag your feet, if you're typically a fall applier and you drag your feet until spring, if there is any ounce of doubt that you can get it done in spring, just get it done right now. Because you might save a little bit of money. Let's say you save $50 a ton on it. When you break that down to a per acre basis, when you start looking at that from a per acre bushel, it is not many. And if you are worried that that product will not be there in spring, and if enough of the demand waits until spring, we may not have the logistics or the capacity to apply it. That's where I sit there and say, okay, go ahead. It's a conversation I had with my dad. I said, Dad, when I look at the phosphate and I look at the potash, I see both of them declining. The global prices continue to drop. The supplies are more than adequate. I said, everything I'm looking at right now says prices are going down. He's like, well, what if I'm afraid that I can't get it on in spring because the ground doesn't thaw and dry and I've got to make a decision between planting and applying? Then put it on this fall. Because the difference isn't, I'm not willing to risk 20, 30 bushels per acre loss of yield because I was trying to save a little bit of money on the front side.
Is there demand destruction? You said less demand. Is there demand destruction at these levels for any of these nutrients?
Yes. Last fertilizer year, and the fertilizer year for us is July 1 through June 30. We plugged phosphate and potash demand, I think, at 30 to 35% lower than normal.
Wow.
Part of that was acre loss. A lot of that was because our corn acre expectations went from like 93, 95 million down to 89, 90.
Right.
So we lost some there. But yeah, application demand was down, partly due to horrible spring conditions. Part was way too wet and too cold. Rest of it was too hot, too dry. So the conditions were not there. But I think a lot of farmers said, I've got good levels in the soil. I'm going to work on some of that. I'll rebuild them if and when phosphate gets lower priced.
Well, little did we know, much like the Russia-Ukraine situation, that we should have just been pouring on the coal heretofore.
I actually, a couple of years ago, before all this started, I had a friend of mine out in Illinois, and he said, I can tell you right now, with the price of phosphate where it's at, I'm doubling my application rate. I'm like, why would you do that? It's like, it doesn't get any cheaper than where we are today. Right. I'm going to put every single possible nutrient in the soil I possibly can, and it'll be there if this thing goes nuts. Smartest dude ever.
I know. And we should have, I mean, potash, $400. There's an ocean of it underneath our feet. The largest mine in the world. My father went to work there for 15 years while farming Mosaic. What's going on with potash? It's $1,000.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, yeah, you look at it just from a Canadian point of view, there's more than that stuff around than we could ever chew through. But it's a world market. And from a world perspective, it goes back to the Russia-Ukraine situation. Russia, of course, invaded Ukraine. Everybody started drawing straws for who was on each side of the invasion. Belarus sided with Russia. Belarus accounts for 20% of global production capacity. Or I'm sorry, global exports. They are one of the top 3 producers of potash around the world. And when they buddied up with Russia, they're landlocked. If you go look at a map, they are landlocked. To their west is Poland, to the east is Russia, to the south is Ukraine, and to the north is Lithuania. They are not an east-west shipper. So Poland, Russia are out. That the capacity just isn't there. Well, they used to send some stuff through Ukraine. Are you going to send potash through a country that you are actively helping their invader? There's not an ounce of that stuff that'll find its way to a port. They'll blow that crap to kingdom come. And Lithuania back in February 1st said, you know what? You're going to support Russia? You're done. We are taking your assets. We are blocking your shipments. You are not using our country anymore to move your product. With the stroke of a pen, the world lost 20% of its export totals.
And Brazil needs it in a way that we don't. They can't grow a crop without some of these nutrients because once you tear up the Amazon, so to speak, that soil isn't like ours. It doesn't keep producing year after year.
Yeah, and you've got global trade flows that are changing. Russia, Brazil is a great microcosm for what's going on. Brazil is way ahead on imports of fertilizers. They're buying them from Russia. Russia is building kind of their new world order based on energy exports, which includes fertilizer. They're way ahead on phosphate imports. They're more than adequate on potash. They've got a lot of nitrogen sitting in place because they went to Russia and said, yeah, I know the US and Canada and Europe and all these countries around the world. They've all sat there and said, no, we won't do business with you. You'll give me a guaranteed supply at a lower price if I pay you in rubles? Done. World trades are changing because of this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of breakdown of former business deals that used to seem easy and were taken for granted, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What does your day look like? I guess you can't really, set a habit to not watch the news, hey?
Yeah. You wake up and you cry a little bit at what's to come for the day. You wonder how much thinner your hair can get because of all the stress.
Yeah, it's a lot, man. I hear you.
I'll tell you what. I wake up today. The first thing I do is I pull up my phone, shut off the alarm 16 times, and finally wake up. And then I pull up the Dutch TTF natural gas price and see where that finished out the day.
That's the first thing you're looking at.
And then I start looking, go check out the news sites. Did Russia do anything further? Is there Nord Stream pipeline attacking or anything like that stands out? And then start getting into it and start figuring out, okay, what happened overnight in Asia? What happened in Europe? What happened with Middle East production? Those sorts of things. And then start to try and pull all that together and say, okay, how does this support or change our point of view on what the markets are, and then start trying to just dive into it and figure out what does this mean.
Yeah, what are the tea leaves saying? Because this is my take, and of course we're very close in so many ways to hearts and minds and prayers are with the folks that are going through what they're going through overseas. But it seems to me that the worse this gets, the more agriculture is going to count, especially in a place like Canada where we have the infrastructure to move product.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the world is waking up to the fact that yeah, we used to focus on technology and all this other stuff. Food supply is every country around Earth's number one security concern. The stupid thing I always bring up in presentations when we start talking about it, everybody talks about, oh, we sieged the castle, we took over the castle. They didn't go climb the walls and stuff like that, like they show in movies. They surrounded the freaking place. They starved them to death because your food supply can only go so far. 2 years ago, I did a podcast with this guy, and I didn't realize it. He was a conspiracy theorist. He was talking about the upcoming food wars. And I talked through the market. I was happy to do so. He had some points. But I'll tell you what, at the time I was like, okay, this guy is kind of out there. There is a lot of things that he said. I can still remember like it was yesterday, where I'm just like, wow. Even if I don't truly agree with him, there's a lot of points where I look at it as like, he wasn't wrong. Food supply is the number one thing for every country, and the world is now coming to terms with that.
Well, a lot of that stuff has unfortunately aged pretty well and actually looked more sane than it did at the time. And I get concerned when people are more concerned, if you want to make an analogy of our level of flatulence relative to climate change, than what's going to actually go into our mouths, and who will be beholden to on the world stage with energy and food if we aren't even permitted to make it for ourselves, let alone others.
Yeah. They've got a tough role. Tremendous amount of price risk, tremendous amount of operation risk, and feeding a sector that sometimes think is trying to kill them.
Exactly.
It's baffling. I mean, if you think about it, the countless hours and, in the field, away from the family, breaking your back, doing all that kind of stuff for an operation that's kind of like, whatever, we don't need you. It stinks. It's not a real fun place to be. And thank God farmers around the world are so committed to what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of people who will reach out, like government types, and say, well, what would it really hurt if they didn't use fertilizer? And the kind of the smart aleck response I give back, what billion people do you want to kill right now? Right. That always every time, well, what are you even talking about? Automatically, Josh Linville's lost his freaking mind. It's like, no, go look at the studies. Without the fertilizer as we use it today, without the technologies that we use, we are not producing enough food for the world population as it is. We need to go kill 1 billion people at least. And it's going to be more humane just to do it quickly than have them starve to death. That's what's dependent. I mean, you've got billions of people around Earth that their survival depends on this stuff. I think the world's finally waking up to that idea.
Not just around the world, my friend, at home. If you're on a fixed income and you got to go buy groceries and your car payment's doubled and you can't get a mortgage like you could 2 years ago, I mean, these things compound, and it's serious when if your family can't afford toilet paper, let alone nutritious beef. What has been the impact in your journey personally and professionally, but with being able to educate and guide and give farmers some clarity on this important topic?
It's a lot of road time. It's a lot of time away from the family. I've missed a few things, but it's a message that has to get out there. More information needs to be had. We need to have a better understanding. And I never want anybody to think that I get up on stage or anything or get on a podcast and say, you're doing it wrong and you need to listen to everything I say. Listen, guys, if I was right 100% of the time, do you think I'm wasting my time with all this kind of stuff out there? The background right now would be a freaking beachfront property down in the Caribbean. I would be driving around a Ford Focus as my daily driver. I'd be driving my Viper down. But it's at least getting the information out there and helping to make better decisions. I mean, it's an incredibly risky proposition.
It's a risky and emotional deal for farmers, and I hope that their level of risk is being rewarded in the market right now. I think it's going to be just that much more important going forward. You talk about 1 billion people going hungry. I think people are going to get touched this winter by them, and I've heard from some pundits that I happen to think are quite accurate in what they're saying, talking about that very number of experiencing some level. And this is a direct outcropping of some of the policies and supply issues we're seeing, geopolitical things going on. But keep up the good work, Josh. I really enjoy you on Twitter. You're keeping everybody on their toes, and you're doing it in a fun and entertaining way. Often, a little bit tongue in cheek or self-deprecating or whatever. You don't take yourself too seriously. So I think that makes some of the bad news that you're delivering as a messenger all the more palatable. And obviously, there's a big demand for your kind of services that can help people that are in this business. I mean, it's just one of the biggest expenses that we're facing now, and it's only going to become more integral as we go forward. So thanks for all your hard work. And how do people get a hold of you or work with you, or what's the best way to interact with you?
Really, Twitter's the best way. The handle there is, if you're not already, at @JLinvilleFert. Go on there. I try to put information on there every day of the week, at least of the weekday, just to give a little bit of a sense of what's going on. We put up the newsletter once a month, and that's really a deeper dive into what's happened, a little bit of an idea of what's going on forward. But go out there, reach out to me, direct message. Those are going to be the best routes.
Perfect. What's your website again, Josh?
The company website is just StoneX, STONEX.com.
Perfect. Okay, folks, we'll go check that out. Yeah, if you want to hear more from Josh and get him in your inbox and see what he's doing on Twitter, which is highly informative and entertaining. So thanks for coming on the show, man. It means the world. I really appreciate it. It's a fascinating topic.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk again. Hopefully things will calm down by next time.
We're going to see you in January. So
yes.
Until then, keep it real.
All right, bud. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.